Make yourself indispensable. When they're looking at your name, when they're going down the list at the end of the year, or whether maybe they're having budget cuts, or maybe they're looking for a person to fill a role, you want them to get to your name and go, that person's off limits. Can't do without that person, because you've so added value in whatever you're doing that no one could imagine doing it without you.
Well, folks, welcome back for another episode of What's Next. And I'm going to try to limit the number of puns I use when talking to our next guest, Dave Alpern, who, as president of Joe Gibbs Racing, his story of starting at unpaid intern and going all the way to the top, writing a book, which had a big influence on me. We're both cancer survivors, so there's a lot to dig in here. But I think you're really going to dig this sort of 200 mile an hour episode as we look at what it takes to be in this world of auto racing and how does that transition through culture and team and business in general. So without any further ado, Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brian. Good to be here today.
Yeah. We had the good fortune to meet each other at a Young Life event. I think we were just kindred spirits at that thing. Conversation moved fast. We've stayed in touch. I got your book, which was amazing. And as we were kind of spending some time talking together, one thing that was really apparent to me was your true care for culture in a company. And so I know we're going to dig into some entrepreneurial things here, but to say culture doesn't matter or culture comes later, I know you've got some pretty strong thoughts on that. So we're just going to dive right in.
Yeah.
Give me your take on culture, man. Like how do you start to build it? How do you shape it? Kind of how does that come about?
Well, it starts with the leader and the leadership, but our company has the name of a person, Joe Gibbs Racing. So clearly in our company, as in others, it starts with the owner, CEO, and then it works down from there. And so really it is the culture is a reflection of the behavior of its leadership. And so for us, it starts with coach. And I have said that I describe the culture at Joe Gibbs Racing as a three-legged stool. It's honor God, put people before profits, and relentlessly pursue winning. I do think that the first two, that the winning part is a byproduct of doing the first two. And it's very easy probably for everyone listening, particularly for a professional sports organization, to focus on the leg of the stool, which is the relentless pursuit of winning. But just if you picture a company that only focused on that above all else, you're going to have unintended consequences, because if you're not, honoring the Lord and you're not putting people first, you're going to be grinding people and turning people over, and it's going to affect your culture. And ultimately, I believe that's going to affect your winning. And so the more you are doing those other things, again, what does that look like to honor God? What does it look like to put people first? I think when you do that, winning actually is a byproduct. But all that to say, and we actually have that on our wall. We have that up on our wall downstairs, but you can put whatever you want up on the wall. And if the behavior of the leader, we can say we do that, but if we're not doing that, people see right through it. And so it starts with the behavior of the leadership. What are you about? What's important to you? And then you need to live that out for the people that you bring in. And you need to bring in people theoretically that are either like-minded or are willing to buy into that. So again, for us, if we don't win, we're out of business. I mean, if we're the 10th best race team, I'm not talking to you on this right now. You do have to be great. And we'll talk about that today. Again, I think that's a mandate. You're supposed to be great at what you do. But being great, a big part of a company being great does start with its culture. And the culture is the behavior of the leaders. And it's bringing in good people that will adhere to that.
Man, I think I already know we could do two shows just on that. But what I love about what you just said there is leadership starts at the top. You referenced Joe. Certainly me spending time with you, I see it. It seems like a recurring theme with our guests has been who you are on Tuesday is also who you are on Friday night. It's also who you are on Sunday on the way to church or whatever you do on the weekends. you're not putting on these multiple hats to try to figure it out. Like, you just are who you are, and that goes in how you recruit people. And the leadership sort of honors and embraces that. Is that kind of what you guys have seen? That, look, we're just looking for the person who is here. They love what they do. They're hard chargers. We embrace that, and we're just that way through and through.
Yeah, I mean, if you asked what do I think the most important traits of a leader? My top two are probably character and authenticity. I think that if you'll notice, that's coming from a person that I don't really have a lot of, I'm not the best in the world at any one particular thing. I don't have a skill where I'm like, hey, I was the greatest at that, or I was the smartest at this. But I think, and that's one thing I've learned, is that leaders look different. You don't all have to be the type A alpha leader like my boss is, and like many of your listeners might, probably are. I kind of grew up thinking that there was only one profile of a leader, and the truth is, with character and with authenticity, I think we all can be leaders. Leadership is influence. That's all it is. And so I think here it starts with character and authenticity, and being that, like you said, being the same person. When you're authentic 24/7. I mean, if you're trying to be someone that you're not, that is not an effective form of leadership, and that's not going to attract the type of people that you want to work there. And I mean, coach is the real deal, and what you see is what you get. He's the same guy every day. And we'll talk about what some of the other traits are, the sense of urgency, the different things, but it really starts with character and authenticity. And again, to be a great leader, in my opinion, or the best kind of leader, really starts with those two things.
And so we're going to go deep here, because I just think it's so valuable, such a great nugget. If this is probably the only takeaway, and we do have more to talk about. So you start as an unpaid intern at Gibbs Racing.
Yeah.
You got a chance to see this from Coach. How did you see that? I mean, I think most of us picture this intern being, and I think you shared your office was maybe inside of a closet,
room closet. Yeah.
Right. It's how do you go from being a guy stuck in a closet to seeing an iconic figure like Coach kind of embody this thing about sort of character, authenticity, and really being great?
Well, early on, and I share this with students quite a bit, I did start in a broom closet. I was unpaid at first, and I didn't have a job description. And I go back to, wasn't particularly great at anything. So I said, I'm going to be great at the things that I can control. My attitude. I'm going to be a fountain, not a drain. I'm never, ever once going to say that's not my job. I'm going to do anything. I'm going to be, every team has that utility player that's not the best player on the team, but they're the one that everybody says couldn't do without that person in the locker room. He or she, they're the glue that keeps the team together. I was like, I'm going to be that guy here. Again, they're not going to say he's the smartest, he's this, but he's the glue. And so there were a lot of things that I decided I'm going to control myself. And I recognized this early on, and that was the who was more important than the what. And what I mean by that was, here I was at this new race shop, but we could have been selling coat hangers. The fact we were racing cars was really cool. We could have been selling coat hangers. It didn't matter, because the who, Joe Gibbs, here I was watching this great leader. I said, I want to be more like him. I want to learn more from him. What I was doing early on stunk. I mean, I was a gopher. I was doing nothing. But and the reason I share that with students, sometimes you're faced with a choice where you could go to a place where you're doing exactly what you always wanted to do, but the who that you're doing it for, well, guess what? The who, that's not going to change. The what? Absolutely. As if evidence for me, that can change over time. So if maybe you have a chance to do something, it's not exactly what you wanted to do, but the who is more important than the what. And so my point is, being in that broom closet early on, I recognized I really like who I'm doing this with. I want to stick around. And so my goal early on in my career was to make myself so indispensable that they couldn't get rid of me. And if you deliver more, again, there's simple rule: deliver more than you cost, and you'll always have a job. Just like as a company, deliver more than you cost, you'll always have a customer. And when you're an unpaid intern, that's a really low bar to deliver more than you cost. So I thought, if I'm one level above a moron, I'll get to stay around. But again, it goes back to all those things that I did control. Hey, I'm going to have phenomenal attitude. I'm going to be a team player. I'm going to try to make everyone around me look better and be better and not, not have it be about me but just be the guy that they're like, we need Dave around. And so that was kind of how I started. And one task would lead to another task. And, I mean, it's a biblical principle. As you can be entrusted with smaller things, you get entrusted with bigger things. And each thing led to another thing, but it was a long journey. And I mean, I know young people often think, man, I'm gonna work hard in college and then that corner office is mine. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. Does not work. It is a grind, and it's a grind of 100 little decisions every day that you make that lead to the next thing. And it's not always very glamorous. It is for some people, but it certainly wasn't for me.
Well, I think it's interesting. You kind of humbly said, I mean, I don't know about this show. Like, I don't come from being an ex-pro athlete or this. But the reality is, I think anybody who let's say, tuned in 10 seconds before the last statement, you mentioned everything that the pro athletes talk about, and that is control the controllables, be accountable. Yeah. You got to put in a lot of practice on those 100 things before you even get a chance to be on stage or on the field or on the track. And at the end of the day, those 100 things, oddly enough, they kind of smell and look a lot like hard work. They're not really any shortcuts, which is, I think, just a cool bridge here. Yeah. Number one, it's consistent, which is great. And number two, on the show, we really talk a lot about experience, not opinion, right? Like right. Our audience wants to hear from people who are preaching what you are, which is, it is hard work. If anybody's informing you that there's some magical shortcut to get you from broom closet to corner office, like, it just does not exist. And consistently, what the feedback when we get in the comments and the emails is like, thank you for reaffirming that, or thank you for kind of waking me back up to what I was doing on the field that made me successful. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Everybody knows I'm a huge note taker. I'm writing stuff down. So when you say who is way more important than the what, that is, I think, if I'm hearing that right, about the leadership, about the team. And then as you think about sort of the overall mission as it relates to, there's families that get supported in your business. There are pieces of the community. I know you guys are a huge part of your community. Is that part of that who, like when you're doing your thing, it's like, hey, we are part of this bigger enterprise that ultimately is bigger than us? Or how would you describe that?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, when we started as a company, one of the things that was evident to me with Coach, and he had done this in the NFL, and again, keep in mind, I work for a 2-sport Hall of Famer, which is pretty cool. And again, he got there through all the principles that we're going to talk about. But Coach demonstrated early to me the power of influence. And what I mean by that, so Coach's oldest son, JD, who has since gone to be with the Lord, but he was my best friend. JD and I went to high school. So here's a great description of the power of influence. In high school, JD, quarterback of the football team, would go sit at different lunch tables with different kids who, he'd plop down and say, I'm JD Gibbs. And they'd go, we know who you are. Your dad coaches the Washington Redskins, and you're the quarterback of the football team, and you're great looking, and you drive a Z28. And, but he would do it because he knew the power of influence, and he would encourage them. And I know, because I was one of them, and that's how we became friends. My point in that is, so I recognized from their family at an early age the power of influence, and that you are given, we're stewards of other positions that we have, whether I was an intern or whether I'm now the president. I am merely a steward of this position, and this position and this company exists for us to influence people. And whether that, and so I go back to, you got to be great, because you're not going to this is another one of my Davisms. Nobody cares what you think if you stink. So if you stink at what you do, nobody's going to really care what you think about anything.
Love it.
But by being great, it then gives you a platform to do good. We got trophies laying around the shop here, over 400 of them, literally nowhere to put them. If we were doing this just for the trophies, we would be missing the whole point. But the idea is our company, your company, everything we do ideally is giving us a platform to be generous, to use the influence that I believe that I am in full-time ministry, that this job, it's not a nonprofit, but it is as a Christian, we're put into our positions as full-time ministry. And so if that is true, then that means the position that I'm in, every win we have, every time I'm in a meeting with a CEO or whoever it is, or a, on down the line, that's my ministry. How am I influencing that person? How are we using the resources that we have here to influence our community, our country, the world? And I think that's a big responsibility. So all that to say, I learned that in an early age from JD. I've watched it with the Gibbs family throughout this company, that what we're doing is a ministry, what we're doing is a platform to influence people positively. And it's not about us. That's another, I think good leadership is not about the leader. The leader recognizes it's not about me. And coach has recognized that. So yeah, look, we want to win, but we want to have influence. So all of what we're doing here, and I believe when we started, whether you're a one-person entrepreneur with your own company, how are you influencing your community? How are you using what God gifted you with to bless and influence others in whatever way you feel led to do, not out of obligation, but because that's what we're, hopefully that's an overflowing of our gratitude for, God's faithfulness to each of us. But so it's a big responsibility, but it puts a lot of pressure on you, because if you do stink, you feel like you're not doing what you're made to do. And so, like, we had a bad year last year. It was a really down year for us. We didn't win the championship. We didn't win as many races, and we're having an offsite this week, and we're going to have 21 engineers and high performing people getting in a room grinding over, all right, what the heck did we do wrong? How do we get better? Those are tough, but that's what you do, because it's our responsibility to be great with all that we have and all the great people we have. Shame on us if we're not winning the championship every year,
Oh, man, music to my ears. I think for a lot of the people listening too, because there are many sort of underlying themes. I think we get both guests on the podcast and certainly the questions that come in afterwards. And I kind of sometimes feel I have to be apologetic for wanting to be great. I mean, you just said it. Look, we've got to be great. If we're going to be stewards of something, we got to be great, and you got to have that balance. And I appreciate you bringing up that, wanting to do that, having an off season, a down season, and yet circling everybody up and basically saying, hey, we might get our asses kicked here, but like, we're coming back and we're going to be better than ever, but there's going to be a little pain in that growth. So as you guys manage that, I'm just curious, which is a bit counterculture, right? This idea of I want to be great. And I'd say not everybody gets a ribbon, right? I think we'd probably be head nod on that one together. How do you balance that wanting to be great and win with the idea that, we're civic to our people, we're good stewards of what we do? Because sometimes it's either or, and I'm clearly hearing you say, no, it's absolutely a both and.
Well, the first answer is it's really hard. And I do want to add one thing just before about the being great, because I think this applies to everything in life. I mean, and that's, again, it's biblical. Whatever you do, do it all in the name of the Lord, which just means, but like, if you have kids, not every kid was wired or made to get straight A's, for example. So it's important to clarify being great for a kid as a student, or a kid who's playing rec league baseball. It may not mean getting straight A's. It may not mean being the all-star and making the all-pro team. That's okay. It's just, it goes back to the grind. It's the working hard, being the best that I can be, and pushing myself. It doesn't always, again, sometimes as parents, we're like, well, what do you mean you weren't valedictorian and you didn't? So, and as a company or as an entrepreneur, don't beat yourself up if you aren't the greatest in the world at whatever the niche is that you're doing. The point is, it's excellence. It's being excellent at what you do and doing it to the best of your ability is what we're called to do. And with that comes influence. But it isn't always winning a world championship. Now, we're a sports team. And again, we do hold ourselves to that standard because we know we're capable of that. And so it is a balance, Bryan. And I mean, again, we're dealing with that right now, where we, I think 2 years ago, I would have told you we were struggling a lot with our culture, and we were finding we were having a lot of turnover, and some people were leaving, and we really doubled down on some culture things. And that was, what does that look like? We had more team lunches and more just things that just said, hey, we appreciate you, all of which were great. Yet here we find ourselves this year with our performance suffering. And so you go, okay, did the pendulum go too far the other way? Did we, and that is a real question. And I think you continue to double down on the culture things, but you go back to part of good leadership is accountability. Hey, we're going to hold everybody accountable, because before the year started, we set goals. We said we want to win this many races and we want to win the championship and whatever. Well, we hit some of our goals, but we didn't. And so I think we owe it to ourselves to say, hey, why, if we all agreed this was a goal that we should be able to attain and we didn't, how can we get better? So I think it comes back from leadership. Leadership has to think those things are both important and that they're not mutually exclusive, because if they don't, you're kidding yourself. And again, I'll be the first to say I work for a two-sport Hall of Famer. He would tell you if he was here, he struggles with that sometimes. We get really caught up in winning and it's easy to go, I don't care what our culture's like, dang it, we're going to kick their rear ends and we're going to win. And so, but again, when you have a high performing, again, in professional sports, we have the best in the world at every area. So we have the best engineers, we have the best analytics people. So the people who come here are wired to want to win. So we don't really have to push them in that area. They're ultra competitive. Most of your listeners are probably the same way. They're as disappointed as the leadership was that we didn't achieve all of our goals. So it goes back to, a lot of it is picking people. You pick the right people that fit into your culture. A lot of this self-polices it, itself, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I that's a perfect segue here, which is, be very intentional. I've said in all the companies I've had, sorry?
Fiercely intentional is what I call it. I love it.
Yeah. I am intentional about the people I hire, that I want competitive athlete types who understand the value of winning. And it isn't at no cost or at any cost. But it is understanding that if we don't, it should sting a little bit. And what are we going to do next, right? In theory, that's the premise of the show. What's next it's what's next with an exclamation point, because we really want to attack it. It's not, oh, me, and what's next, and blame somebody else. And I think you guys being intentional about hiring everybody from uber bright competitive engineers to obviously race car drivers who are going, 200 miles an hour and putting it all on the line to try to win. And even when that doesn't all harmonize, you guys are coming back to kind of recirculate ideas to say, okay, and to your point, my guess is you and coach aren't standing at the top pointing your finger at everybody saying, hey, this should hurt. It's like, they're probably coming to you saying, hey, we got to change some stuff, man. It did not feel good to not win. Right.
Yeah. And we have an interesting dynamic I want to point out to your listeners, many of whom, may not be familiar with NASCAR, is we're a very unique pro sports team in that we actually have teams competing against each other. So we compete, we actually have, we have a AAA series, which would be like AAA minor league, that we race 4 cars on Saturdays in that series. And then we race 4 cars in the Premier Cup series on Sunday. So every Sunday there's 36 cars turning in a circle, and 4 of them belong to us. So those of you who have multiple children, just imagine your kids all competing every weekend, and someone's always hacked off because they can't. So we go into every weekend knowing the best scenario is 3 teams are going to lose. That's best. And you mentioned engineers and drivers. Keep in mind, we have pit crews. So each team has pit crew athletes, all of whom were D1 athletes. Many played professional sports that are now on the pit crew. Those athletes get to Joe Gibbs Racing. They compete with each other for a spot on Sunday. And then if they make it to Sunday, they compete with their teammates in a pit next to them on separate teams. And then we fly home on the same plane, sometimes with one seat having a guy whose team crashed in the first lap, who had to wait an hour for the victory lane celebration for his teammate who on a different team won the race. Again, imagine 2 brothers sitting on a plane in those scenarios. And yet, how do we come back to the shop and all be one team? Hey, we're all one team. We're all in it, lock arms 6 days a week. But on Sunday, you want to kill each other because you're on separate teams. So you have that. And we have a driver meeting where we've got these 4 uber elite drivers. They have crew chiefs who are like head coaches. You have engineers, pit crews, all of them wear different colors on Sunday because they're on different teams. But on Monday through Saturday, they wear Joe Gibbs Racing. They're all together. And they've got to buy into the idea that if I make them better, they're going to make me better. And I'm going to win some and they're going to win some. So that dynamic now, and again, what brings us all together is when no one wins the championship, we all agree, okay, well, we got to get better. But even when one wins the championship, you have this unique dynamic, unlike most teams, where we come home from the championship and there's a group on the plane that's depressed because they lost the championship,
Sure.
whereas another group won it, even though our organization all won. So it's just a very, and again, if there's people listening that maybe have different divisions or different things, that it is again, it goes back to leadership, and it's part of being intentional in building a culture that buys into the idea that we're all one team.
Man, I appreciate you bringing that up because you were very kind. My brother and I were in Charlotte, and we were able to come down to the pit. Thanks to a very special Dave Alpern pass, and got to be around the pit crew guys. We were literally right on the wall in pit road, and my goodness, these guys, to your point, all ex-D1 athletes, just built like nothing, competing like, moving at a speed that is unfathomable, and working right next to each other. Right, they're really literally right next to each other.
Crazy, isn't
it? One group's going to be celebrating possibly at the end of the day, and the other one, even if they survived the whole race, if they came in anything second or behind, I'm sure that ride in the plane isn't high five. And it'd be like the offense cheering that even though they lost 36-34, the offense scored 34 points. So it just doesn't happen like that, right? So
right.
A ton to manage, man. That is a ton to manage. I guess, thinking about these high competitive athletes, part of what I want to dig into is you talk about this a little bit in the book, but you've got all these high performers there and they don't last forever, right? Guys get older, they make transitions in their lives, their professions. Where have you seen guys take what they learned in the specific sport of racing and maybe transition it to either being a team owner at the very high level, or maybe as simple as going on to do something completely unrelated to racing? Have you seen some commonalities where guys are like, I can take this and no matter what, if I apply it, I'm just going to go be a stud and go do something over here?
Well, again, I think it goes back to a word we used before. The guys who make those transitions are very intentional about it. And, it starts while they're still an athlete. In other words, we'll have, they might be a couple of years into their pit crew career and they're realizing already, hey, this isn't going to last forever. And they're taking an interest in an area that they might be gifted in. We had a guy that was played tight end in college and was a finance major. And he started connecting with our finance department while he was a pit crew member and said, can I help? Can I look at spreadsheets? Because he was thinking someday I want to have a relationship. I want them to know that I can do this. And they were already being intentional about that potential transition. Maybe it's the sponsorship group. Maybe it's, hey, I want to work in the back as a mechanic. It depends. But in most cases, these guys don't wait until their playing career is over to be thinking about it. So again, it's this intentionality of, hey, what do I want it to look like? Excuse me, when my playing days are over. And a pit crew career, probably similar to others. It could last 2 years. It could last 12, 13 years. Some of these guys last a long time, but they're still young men when they get done. And so many of them, want to transition into racing, but almost all of them are very intentional about it ahead of time. And they're hustling, they're doing extra. They're, what one transition we found that's very effective is we've had several pit crew guys who transitioned into the sponsorship group when they retired. And the reason it's natural is because they're at every race where all of our sponsors are. So if they're already there, why don't we have them build relationships with the sponsors in the morning before the race where they're, I'll use FedEx as an example. If you're on the Denny Hamlin FedEx pit crew and there's FedEx executives at the races every week, well, we'll be intentional about you building a relationship with them giving them tours around the pits, talking to them, so that as your career starts winding down, you've got that relationship already started to either transition with us and maybe be one of their account people. So that's just a small example, but I think being very intentional, recognizing where's an area that I can contribute, and again, grinding after it, not just thinking it's going to fall on your lap when you're done because you were an athlete.
Yeah, this is great. I have a very similar story. I was fortunate. I played pro soccer for 11 years, 10 of which were here in Detroit under the ownership of the Ilitch family that owns the Red Wings, the Tigers, Little Caesars Pizza. And our season was roughly 9.5 months. And so we had called a 3-month off season where you could do whatever you want to do. It didn't really matter. But the Ilitches invited me into the organization, and I got a chance to sit in on negotiations with Coca-Cola for the Red Wings for next season, or things as small as what the VIP packages were going to be for season ticket holders. But the point was I got invited in by the Ilitches, and I don't know, without that invitation, I would have sought it out. I kind of maybe didn't really know. But when the invitation was there, I'm like, man, this is kind of like my MBA away from having been at San Diego State. Fast forward 10 years, I felt like I had 4 MBAs from arena management and real estate management as they rebuilt what's now the Fox Theater District and New Tiger Stadium out to selling sponsors. And so I'm saying that because I now am the benefactor of an amazing ownership group in the Ilitches and what they did for us as players when you wanted to accept the opportunity. And what I'm hearing you say, which I've also built into businesses now post-retirement from sport, is building this pathway that isn't linear. It's not, hey, when you come in here, you go there. You gave us an example of, hey, if you're on Denny's team and FedEx is our sponsor and you have an interest in something like that, we'd love to put you in front of that. And so my takeaway here is for the audience, as you're building your business, whether you're just getting started or you've fully done it, look into your organization and find these opportunities to create pathways. Even if you don't even have the people at the bottom or the middle or the top of that pathway, it attracts talent first and foremost. And exactly like Dave's saying, if you go back to the ethos of we are stewards of the organization, of the people, of the money, of all of that, we're empowered to raise people up and expose them to those opportunities. I've been a benefactor of it. Dave, I know by reading your book, you certainly have, starting as an unpaid intern to where you are today. So I think if there's ever a pause point to say, don't miss this point in your businesses that you are creating, please create pathways and show your employees, show your future people that you're interviewing. Your employees will tell their friends, right? You're going to want to come work here because there's a place for me to go current, during, after.
Make yourself indispensable. Make yourself indispensable so they can't. So when they're looking at your name, when they're going down the list at the end of the year, whether maybe they're having budget cuts or maybe they're looking for a person to fill a role, you want them to get to your name and go, that person's off limits. Can't do without that person, because you've so added value in whatever you're doing that no one could imagine doing it without you. That's hard to do, and that happens over time, but it happens because people are intentional, and coach uses the phrase, get after it, because you got to get after it.
Well, my guess is, I feel like you're just throwing up a softball here, but when we step back and zoom out and think about our businesses, right? You're certainly running a much larger organization with many very competitive businesses within it. When you zoom back out, you make yourself indispensable. Yet you've got sponsors to renew every year, regardless of where they are in contract season. You've got fans that want to follow teams and not follow teams for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
So even as companies, I think if you don't make yourself indispensable, if you don't make yourself attractive and valuable, we can say it about employees, we can say it about owners, but really as businesses, if we're not doing it, and you've probably seen a lot in this sort of wreckage over your, tutelage just in NASCAR, we can look in any other sport. There's a lot of things buried on sidelines that just never made it because they weren't indispensable. They weren't valuable.
100%.
Right?
I mean, we have the racing side. We also have the commercial side. So, I mean, I talked about the competitiveness on the racing side, but on the commercial side, we're asking brands for millions of dollars to put a sticker on a race car. None of them need the service that we're providing. None of them. So how do you become indispensable to a brand to where a group of, a board of decision makers, many of whom have never been to a NASCAR race, where they would look at your property and go, oh, can't do without that. We got to keep that. We got to keep spending millions on them. Again, that in and of itself, that's what we wake up and think about every day. And we've got a team of people figuring that out, just like with whatever your listeners' businesses are. They're either providing a product or a service or both that in many cases, somebody doesn't have to have. Now, maybe if you own a wedding business or a funeral home or some of those things, but in that case, they could compete. You're competing with someone else they could
For
choose
sure.
from that's not yours. So we're all in the sales business. We're all, whether you're selling employees to come be part of your deal, whether you're selling a sponsor to put a sticker on your car, whether you're selling an idea to your team, we're all kind of in sales for sure. But again, we're in a sales business that you can't really fake, because at the end of the day, people are watching and they know what you're about, and so you can only fake things for so long. So, but anyway, yeah, no. So it's just interesting that there's so many different facets, but I think all these principles apply to all the different parts of our business.
Yeah, we just had Jeff Duden, who's owner of a very large franchise conglomerate called
I know Jeff.
Friends, and you know Jeff. He's
Yeah.
in your backyard there. That's right.
Yeah.
Jeff loves to say, business is a full contact sport. And having been a high level football player, if you meet Jeff, I mean, his arms are as big as my legs. Awesome dude, very inspirational, and very much along this mission of we take care of our people. But at the end of the day, there can be multiple sides of this business, but the reality is you got to get in there and do it. It's going to be hard work, and we're getting after it. Right. So I think that's important. I was going to wait till the end of the show to talk about the book. I'm going to just really give you props here.
Awesome.
Taking the lead, folks. If you don't have this, or you just want to have something, it's pretty tattered on the corner. It travels with me. What Dave's talking about here, these examples of taking care of sponsors, and you've got a couple of chapters in there about how companies started with you with very little faith and hope, and yet you might end up 10 years later with sponsors who have some tough board decisions and budget cuts to make, but because that relationship had been nurtured and taken care of and grown, we're saying no to something else, but we're going to continue to say yes to you. And it isn't just because you had the biggest sticker on a car.
Right.
It was because of all the things you guys were doing. So I'm only highlighting one small part in here. I think it's just a fantastic read if you want to really get an inside look at, yes, racing, but more about what we're talking here. Like the truth of competitive business is in this book. So my shameless plug, go pick it up.
I appreciate that. Well, 100% of my proceeds get given to charity, to the JD Gibbs Legacy Fund, which funds Urban Young Life. So I don't mind shamelessly plugging it for that reason.
Well, it's in the show notes for sure, folks. You're going to find the link in there, and that is awesome, Dave, to kind of give that out. As we get sort of the tail end here, I do want to spend some time. You talk about legacy. I know you've referenced it here with Coach. As you think about what are the non-negotiables for you guys, and you spend a lot of time with Coach, what are the non-negotiables maybe for you and Gibbs Racing? And I hate to mix those two together, but they seem like they're inseparable at this point, where you'd say we're focused on legacy and what we're doing. We've talked about this sort of stewardship. What are the non-negotiables? And I think our listeners want some of this stuff of, I feel like at times I have to say yes to everything. And we know that's just a trap. And so what are the non-negotiables, if you can think of a couple for you guys, you'd say, we just don't go there. We don't do it because legacy and the future success of our company matters so much.
Well, I appreciate you asking. It does start with, at the very beginning, it's a mindset, this stewardship mindset. Because if you genuinely, and again, I promise I'm not doing this to sound preachy. I'm talking to myself, but by definition, being stewardship is believing that my stuff isn't mine, that I'm just entrusted to take care of it. So it starts with a mindset. Like if we think this business, if it's mine, and I'm doing this to build for the sole purpose of building all this wealth and I built this, therefore I, then it's hard to have the mindset of, hey, I want to give this away. I want to have influence. And I would say that's both as individuals and as a company. And so it does start with a mindset. And again, I learned from Coach that he is a steward of this company, and we are just entrusted with it. It's not for our own glorification. And so a lot of this goes back to that really shifting your mindset to, man, what a privilege I have to take care of this stuff, but it isn't all my stuff. So it starts with that. And again, and it goes back to the stewardship thing of, do you have a few anchor things that you're supporting? Do you believe that your business and that your role in that business is for a greater purpose? I think a lot of it starts with that. I would then say, and I'll be the first to say, I don't know that we do as great a job in this, because again, high performing sport never stops. But I had an executive at Toyota once. I consider him a mentor, really wise guy. And he told me, for you to be the best president of Joe Gibbs Racing, you first have to be the best husband, the best dad. You have to be the best version of you. And that's the best gift you can give to your company. Super counterintuitive, particularly for men, because we think, I gotta outgrind everybody. I gotta never leave this place at all costs. And so I think it starts with, if I'm going to lead well, if our key leadership here is going to lead well, what are we doing to take care of making sure they've got their priorities straight, and that they have healthy, if they're married, hey, they got healthy marriages, and they're spending time with their kids, and that they're not missing the things that they, I honestly feel sometimes like I'm a shield to my direct reports, where if I know, because I'm a little further along, like my kids are out of college, and if someone's got a high school graduation or a prom or something, I'm like, don't go to the race this weekend. I got it. I'm going to take them. You need to be at that, because they may be afraid to ask, or they may feel like, hey, I'm letting everybody down. So some of good leadership is doing that, is you're almost like their pastor, like their shepherd. You're their protector. You're like, hey, I'm protecting you from yourself. Because if you're a hard charger, you're going to want to miss that thing. And I'm going to tell you, you're not missing that. You need to go to that. Now and again, a lot of people will figure that out on their own. So that may sound counterintuitive, but I do feel this responsibility there to say, am I doing everything I can? I know I'm going to get all of them at work. I don't need to bust their chops day in and day out on that, because if you pick the right people, you've got these high achieving. So how am I, number one, modeling in my own life those things, and then how am I protecting them and enabling them to do those? Because I think when they come back, they're going to be better, they're going to be more loyal, they're going to be hungry to do the things because they've fed themselves in what's important. And that comes back to legacy. And I will end again with this one. I've gone along on this part, but I had the privilege of speaking at JD Gibbs's funeral. He passed away at 49 years old, probably the peer that I admired the most in the world, and made no sense. And here he is gone. And I would say that in his 2-hour service, which by the way has been viewed millions of times online, it was a wonderful testimony to a life well lived. Not once did anyone mention anything that he did at work. Not once. Now, it was all about the influence he'd had on people as a result of the great work that he did. But again, work was just the tool, was just the platform to influence and impact people's lives, which you heard an outpouring of. So when you talk about legacy, that is a picture of legacy. So, hey, what are people going to say about me? I got news for everyone listening, and this is from someone who went from an unpaid intern to president, and I'm really proud that I'm the title of president. That ain't going on my tombstone. That my title is not going on my tombstone. That is not my legacy. And it's not our legacy as men. We have to remember that often, that the titles don't go on the tombstones. And that meeting that you held, that you made you miss something that was really important in your life, you ain't going to remember that next week, much less 10 years from now. So again, you gotta be fiercely intentional with your schedule. You got to prioritize the things that are really important to you, and you got to fight for them. Just like you fight for stuff at your company, you got to fight for stuff in your own life, because the legacy you leave, people are watching. And again, when they, I often think about what are they going to say at my funeral? Are they going to say, boy, he got some great sponsorships and they won a lot of races? I hope they don't say that. I hope those things give me the ability to influence people, that they will say, because maybe I made a difference in their life. And I think that hopefully is a goal for all of us in the companies we're building and in the careers that we're building for ourselves.
Well, I appreciate you blending those two things between non-negotiables and legacy, because oftentimes they can feel uh,
Yeah.
miles apart. And I think your ability to say they're very closely tied together. And I love the fact, fight for what's right, right? Some of the things that I wrote down, understanding that if what you're hearing is I, that person that you may be thinking of hiring into your team, who has this great history of sales, you're probably getting the heads up, because if you brought this from sport, you realize there's not a lot of I, the old adage that there's no I in team, a lot to be said about that. And I really do appreciate that statement. It's going to make its way in for me, which is no title on a tombstone. I think oftentimes, as entrepreneurs, we feel like we've earned this badge of honor.
Yeah.
And what I hope, maybe saying it better, or you said it better than I would, but yeah, I'm not hopeful that on my tombstone it says entrepreneur. Like that isn't a badge of
Yeah.
honor. I hope it gave me the opportunity to be with my family when it counted, to embrace and mentor young up and comers
Yeah.
in what they're doing. So I love the way you tied those things.
And Bryan, I wanted to point something out, like on this margin thing, being fiercely intentional. I also want, for people listening, like that's also not meant to guilt you out either. Like it's important to recognize you have different stages of life. Like if someone listening, for example, is in med school right now, or you're doing your residency to be a doctor, your level of margin is going to be different than somebody in my stage of life, in my career, or in someone else's career. It's different for everyone. It's just a matter of taking inventory of what your non-negotiables are. And for you, it might mean, hey, I want to do a 20-minute run every day and have time to call my best friend for 15 minutes, whatever it is. I'm just saying they don't just accidentally show up in your schedule. You have to be intentional. So whatever that looks like for you in the stage of life you're in, finding your non-negotiables and your North Star, and hey, what's super important for me? Yes, I want to build this business, but these are the important legacy things, and go after those as best you can. And again, it will look different. It looked different for me when my three kids were little than it does now, where I'm not schlepping people to practices and coaching their teams. And you know what I mean? It's just different. And I miss that, by the way. So
No,
if you're in the taking your kids to practice stage, embrace it, enjoy it, don't endure it. It goes by quick.
yeah, and not to sound like a couple of old dudes sitting on
Yeah,
a old
we
porch
are.
rocking some chairs. My twins that are 23, I've been blessed to have them home over this holiday season. And as they sort of venture into what's next in their lives, they are referencing this idea of having a vision of future with mom and dad, having healthy discussions about business. We sort of jokingly, but in truth, say there is no balance in life; it's balancing. And in the spirit of words matter, you're constantly balancing. We call it seasons of life.
Yeah.
That much like you're talking about, that where are you? Take inventory of that. But we also knew that even in starting businesses and growing them, the one thing that was not going to fall out of balance is dad wasn't going to be away for a period of time, uh, without being able to say, okay, we're going to rebalance that stuff. We understand, hey, starting a business can be tough. The hours are long. It looks like hard work, and it is. And there's also going to be some balance to that to make sure we keep that
For
health in our
sure.
family. And I think kind of the way you said that is, it's really important.
Isn't talking? Can I have Bryan and I? For those listening, both have twins. Mine are 28, and I have a 25-year-old. Yes, we're old, but isn't it great to talk to your adult kids about business? And I can't tell you how many times they would hearken back and go, "How did you do that?" Like we had no. When I was 12, I didn't know, how did you go to this one thing, or how many races did you go to, or you didn't go to as many races that like it's
Yeah.
kind of like the light bulb, because again, they're watching. They were
Yeah.
watching. And so they wanted to know dad works hard and it's a priority, but they also want to know they were more of a priority. And for dads listening and moms listening, it is really hard. It's hard. It's a hard
Yeah.
balance. Don't beat yourself up, by the way.
Yeah, and it's not perfect. I mean, that's
Yeah,
literally,
yeah,
Dave, that's
for
what we were
sure.
talking about is my boys were sort of glorifying some of this. My wife's looking at me, Denise is looking at me going, and I'm like, hey, boys, I mucked this up very severely many, many times, right? And leading into why do I really feel this strong pull to mentor young entrepreneurs? Because I goofed it up a lot. Like I'd love to tell you, hey, we've been married 34 awesome years. Denise would probably be like, yeah, it's probably about 30. There are some tough times in there where we're just trying to figure that out. It is hard. It's absolutely worth it. And
For
I mean,
sure.
Dave, you've really had, I kind of forgot the fact that you're managing 4 independent, fully entrepreneurial minded teams within one bigger entrepreneurial organization under coach. That insight was so cool to think about. You kind of give the example of your 4 kids. I couldn't imagine. I had a hardest time when my boys played on separate teams, given, this is dad of twins, that they're going to play each other. They wrestled against each other in high school. I'm like, oh man, this is such a no-win situation.
Imagine your kids all playing in a golf tournament the same weekend, and they're in the same foursome playing against a bunch of other people, but they're competing against each other. And who are you rooting for? And who do you cheer for? And, it's a mess.
Man. Well, thank you for spending time with us. As you can, if you're listening, I'm sorry you don't get to see this, but the big grin on my face is just, I feel so empowered getting done with these kind of conversations. Dave, you and I have had a chance to spend some time together. Thank you so much for coming. Where to get the book is going to be in the show notes, as are a lot of what we talk about here. Any links to what is down below. As always, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. That's how we get more guys like Dave on the show. Dave, I'm going to press you a little bit here because I know we didn't get through probably 10 things we probably could have talked about. If you'll agree to come back on in 2025, I'd love to have you back. Yeah. And also like to hear what happened. How did that sort of transition, and what's next in your team as you reformatted?
Yeah, for sure.
How's that playing out? So thank you so much for being on the show, folks. If you enjoyed what you like, pass it on to friends. And more than anything, thanks for being a part of What's Next.